Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things we need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, we're going to remove our center cover here and then all 5 of our lug nuts so we can remove the wheel. Now that the wheel's off, let's continue on by removing our cotter pin that comes right across here. Remove this right here. Set that aside. Next, we're going to remove the ABS sensor from the knuckle. There's a 10mm headed bolt. Go ahead and remove that. Once you have the bolt out, just go ahead and give this a little wiggle, remove it. Next, you want to just inspect it, make sure you don't have any debris on there. This one looks okay, we'll set it aside. Next, let's remove our 2 caliper bracket bolts using a 17mm. There's one here, one right up top. A couple threads. Now we can remove the caliper, take a look at those pads, and then we'll just go ahead and hang it so we're putting no pressure on our flex hose. Remove your rotor. Next, let's separate the knuckle from the strut. To do that, I'm going to use a 22mm wrench on this side with the bolt, and then I'll use a 22mm socket on the other side to remove the nut. There's one. Now we can start lowering this down a little bit. Now we're going to move along the bottom here and start separating the ball joint from the control arm. Typically, you're going to use a 17mm for these, but these have been replaced, so I'm going to use a 19. So now we're just going to go ahead and pry down on this control arm. We're also going to start lifting up on the knuckle with the axle. Start separating this ball joint. All right, let's get the axle out of there. And now we can get over to the press. Now once you have this off of the vehicle, the next thing that you want to do is go ahead and get this off of here. For us in particular, it comes off entirely too easily. Overall, it should be kind of stuck in there, and what you would want to do is just carefully try to get underneath it on one of these lips, and then just give it a little bonk, and try to get it off of there. After that, you just want to inspect it, make sure it's still in good order, and then we'll move along to the snap ring. Now that we have this off, the next thing that you want to pay attention to is the snap ring that's located inside here. You're going to want some nice big long snap ring pliers for this. Plenty of leverage. Let's try to get into these grooves. We'll squeeze it together and try to get it out of here. The next thing that we have to do is start pressing the hub out of the bearing. So to do that, I'm going to use a 30mm socket. It fits directly over the hub, and then that's going to fit right directly down and through this bearing. But to press it out, we need to, of course, have this nice and secure. So I put a bar coming across these 2 ears where the caliper bracket was, and then I have this one over here, which is right up against the backing plate onto where the outer tie rod end goes. Essentially, it could start bending this a little bit, but we can just flex that right back out of the way. We do need to have something secure to press up against, though. Start pressing this down. And get this off of here, see what's going on. All right, so we've got half of that off. This part we can set aside for recycling. Now the next thing we have to do is start pressing our original bearing out of the knuckle here. That's going to go through from the front out towards the center area. So what I did was I just found a bearing that fits right around that, and essentially I'm just going to go ahead and push it out. You can also use a cup or whatever you might happen to have that gets on the lip of the bearing itself. Okay, so now at this point we got our original bearing out of there. We're just going to go ahead and clean up this entire area. That way there we can go ahead and press in our brand new bearing. Now that we have everything cleaned out, all the way along this back wall here, all inside the area where the bearing's going to be and where the snap ring's going to be, let's continue at the press here. We're just going to lay this down as flat as possible in a straight line with the press. We can take our bearing. Now this bearing, you don't necessarily have to worry about which way it goes. Generally, if you see a magnet on one side and not the other, you're going to want that facing away from where the wheel's going to be. For this one in particular, there is no magnet. Let's go ahead and slide this in as straight as possible here. The next thing that you're going to want to do is take your original bearing, and we're going to go ahead and place this outer wall right up against the outer wall of the brand new bearing. You definitely don't want to press anywhere on any of the center areas here. Just go ahead and line that up. Now let's start pressing this down as straight as possible. All right there, it feels as though it got a little bit hard. I'm going to give it a little bit more pressure here. Now let's release that. Get this off of here, remove this, and now let's grab our snap ring. Put the snap ring on your snap ring pliers. We're going to go ahead and slide this down and into position, which is essentially just into that lower groove down there. There we are. Now we're going to start pressing the hub into the bearing itself. To do this, let's get this out of the way. I'm going to take a socket that fits directly inside this area right here, so we're putting no pressure on any of our lug studs. There we are. Now we're going to take our knuckle, put the hub right inside the center area of this. There we are. Now the next thing that we need to do is start pressing this down. To do that, we want to only press on this inner ring right here. That's going to be easiest using one of the original races from your original bearing. So I'm going to carefully line that up as straight as possible. Put a little brick on here. And now we can start pressing this down. Now as we press this down, I generally like to try to spin this a little bit. That just ensures that I'm not pressing on anything I shouldn't be. If this feels like it's firm, you're pressing in the wrong areas. Okay, so right there it feels like it just got nice and stiff on me there. I'm going to pay attention down inside this area here. You want to make sure that the hub is pressed all the way up against the bearing on the inner portion there. We need to make sure that this can still spin. This feels perfect. Let's release pressure and inspect it. Now it's going to be time to get this ring on here. You want to pay attention to that hole right there. That's for the ABS sensor. This is the area for the ABS sensor on the knuckle, so what you're going to want to do is carefully try to get this lined up. Once it feels as though the hole is lined up with the other hole as straight as possible, go ahead and bonk this in until it's nice and secure. Once the shield's on, let's get this back into the vehicle. We're just going to go ahead and start sliding the axle through the bearing. I'm also going to start bringing this ball joint up so I can put the studs into the lower control arm at the same time. Get this caliper out of the way. Slide that axle in. Now we're going to take our mounting bolt. I always like to use a little bit of red thread locker on these. We'll start that in. Both of our nuts. Now we're just going to bottom these out, and then we'll torque all three of them to 90 foot-pounds. Now we're going to get our two bolts ready that hold our knuckle to our strut. I like to use red thread locker on the threads and a little bit of copper never sees on the shank area. Go ahead and start lining this up. Give it a little wiggle. These bolts go through from the front to the back. Careful for that ABS wire. Start the nuts on there. After that, we'll go ahead and bottom these out, and then we're going to torque each of them to 162 foot-pounds. Now we're going to move along to installing our rotor. Typically on the back side of the rotor where it mounts up against the hub, you're going to find some rust. You need to make sure you clean all that out so the rotor will sit flush up against the hub. Copper never sees on your mating surface. Now we can get the rotor on. I always just put on one of my lug nuts to hold the rotor still for me while I continue. Next, we're going to clean up the threads and add some red thread locker. Once you have that done, let's continue on by sliding the caliper over the rotor. Get it right into position here. Once the caliper's over, let's go ahead and line up those bolt holes. We'll start in both of our bolts, we'll snug them up, and then we're going to torque these to 80 foot-pounds. Let's get our ABS wire back secured here. Just slide that into position. Should want to lock into some little tabs. Now we can connect this in the hub. Slide that right into position. We can take our bolt, start that in. Get my hand out of the way. Snug it up. Make sure it's nice and tight. Now we're just going to take this, line up that hole right there. We'll get our bolt in there. Snug it up. Let's get this lined up. Got our ABS wire right on there. The brake hose lined up as well. Get that bolt through there. Now we can get our plastic shield on here. We're just going to take it so this lip comes behind this area. Slide this lip up and behind as well. Line up those bolt holes, start in both of your bolts, and then snug them up. Time for the axle nut. We'll go ahead and put it on here. We're just going to bottom this out. We'll get it closer to the ground, and then we'll torque it to manufacturer specification. Now to torque this, either you can have a second person inside the vehicle that's going to be able to hold on the brake hard enough so this won't spin, or you can just use a nice long pry bar coming across these studs down to the ground to hold this for you. Then we'll continue on to torquing this to 217 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time for the axle nut lock and our cotter pin. You can see that it has slots that go through it for the cotter pin. You want to make sure that it lines up so you can go ahead and put it right through the axle. Slide that on through. Watch your eyes. Let's get the wheel on here. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and start on all of our lug nuts, bottom them out, get the wheel on the ground, and then we'll torque the lug nuts to 76 foot-pounds. Torqued. Go ahead and take this, pop it on there.